It's odd, isn't it, to think, chums, when you think about it. There is Meghan Markle basking in some, shall we say, to be kind, so-so reviews of her with love, Meghan. And what's interesting, according to sources, is that when Meghan tried to offer her jam making to inside the royal pantry, as it were, people were not really that impressed. But as you can see from the documentary or series, whatever you want to call it, Meghan simply repackages things. So what's to say that the same thing allegedly is not happening with the jams? And I mean that in fun. But it's a funny thing, isn't it, to allow yourself to be exposed like that, saying, oh, just re-put things in bag with a label on. People will think you've done something special for them. No, they won't. But of course, if you really wanted to do something special, you could be a radical influencer. Absolutely. We use that phrase, don't we, today, about people being influencing and all that sort of stuff. But it's been around forever. We're all influenced by something. Now, this particular thing, I'm very much influenced by. Yes, I don't mind sharing that with you, chums. And whenever I see this, it's very hard to resist. Let me explain. Morning, good to see you today. Thank you so much as ever for taking the time out to join me. I don't know about you, but there are certain things, we mentioned it, didn't we, the other day, about treats. Whenever you see them, you think, oh no. And I was talking to a colleague recently who said that when they're at the seaside, and it's true this, it's just the whiff of fish and chips with the sea air that you think, oh, I've got to have some. It's like fried onions, isn't it? And hot dogs in the air. Somehow they seem more appealing than they do, when you're doing them yourself at home. And when you think about it, royal influence has been around for so many years. You see, we think about things now and we look and think, well, where did that come from? And the one thing that I always love, I don't know about you, if I'm having a pot of tea somewhere and they have one, a slice of Victoria sponge cake. Oh, 2 sponges and cream and jam lightly dusted with coating. Oh, I mean, you can't resist, can you? You can. Well, there's always one, isn't there? But you can't really, can you? Do you know what I mean? You always think this is going to be lovely. And it is a treat, Wherever you go, it's quite an expensive treat now, let's be honest. But actually, this particular sort of thing took off, all thanks to Anne, the Duchess of Bedford, way back in the 19th century. She was, well, one of those prolific, you might say, influencers, people. And one of her chums was none other than Queen Victoria. And one day they were talking about how they just literally felt a little bit whammy, a bit wheezy in the afternoon because they couldn't really keep. You see, you've got to remember, dinner was about 8 till 9 o'clock. A little bit of light lunch, and so you had a big gap, and this is really where afternoon tea came from. Now, apparently where it gets more interesting is, although the sponge cake had been around really since the 15th century, basically the Duchess said to the Queen, Queen Victoria, well, I normally have a bit of this. It just sort of puts me on a little bit. And so she took it and thought, oh, this is really nice. When she got back to Buckingham Palace, she modified the recipe somewhat to buttercream. And so from that particular point, Queen Victoria insisted every single afternoon to having a slice of Victoria sponge cake. Now this got out into the sort of, the bigger world, as it were, and that got out into the chattering classes. And what happened was, this became the fashion, as we know today, afternoon tea. And people then would go around to each other's houses. Ladies were permitted to visit each other's houses without gentlemen, without the raised eyebrows. You get my picture. And so if you were serving tea and a sponge cake, well, that was seen as all right. But where it got even more interesting was, you see, once that got out, people started to rephrase it and say, oh, the Victoria sponge cake, the thing that the Queen has. And that's how really the name stuck. So we talk about sort of influencing and people doing that. And literally they had to write to Queen Victoria and say, would it be all right if we actually called it the Queen Victoria sponge cake, the Victoria sponge cake? And apparently the palace wrote back and said, absolutely, she'd be delighted. No money involved, no transaction, but she knew the power of marketing. That was the whole thing. So of course, when you look at things today, as I said at the start of this video, and you look at Meghan chopping up fruit or, making clouds with yogurt and all this sort of stuff, nothing is new. It's just the fact that it depends on how you're selling it. And in today's world, we're always wanting to sell everything. But back then, during the reign of Queen Victoria, she was just delighted because, as she pointed out, it's quite cheap to make, quite, filling for people, and a bit of a treat. So much so that when visiting dignitaries came to Buckingham Palace and, Windsor Castle, everybody insisted on a slice of Victoria sponge cake because it became that famous. And she apparently was delighted by the fact that suddenly she'd managed to change the palette of some of her subjects at least. Fascinating insight. Makes you want a slice of the cake now, doesn't it? Go on, admit it. I'll put the kettle on. Neil Sean in the very heart of London.